Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. The topic for today's episode, why it is not Spotify's fault, why it is the music industry's fault for how little artists, songwriters, and bands get paid from streaming. What inspired this video is that it's this time of the year where if you subscribe to a streaming service, you are getting your end of the year wrap. The different streaming services call it different things, and it's basically telling you how much music you listen to, your most listened to songs, your most listened to bands, your most listened to genres. So people are posting this on social media, and you're also getting this backlash that Spotify and the streaming services do not pay out enough. Thus, Spotify sucks. Spotify, is the problem for all the things that are wrong with the music industry right now. Few things before we go on. First, I already made a video that I titled "Stop Shaming People for Streaming Music," but I felt it was important for this video to come out first. Second, I realized there's a lot of different streaming services, but I'm just going to be saying Spotify because they're the big one. They have the most subscribers, but this applies to all streaming services. And third, I want to make it very clear that I do believe that the artists do not get paid enough. The songwriters and the bands do not make enough money from streaming. So please, you should be buying physical media. You should be supporting your bands however you can, whether it's going to a show, buying physical media, whatever. But the money that the artists make, the little amount of money that they make, it is not Spotify's fault. And the reason why I say this, Spotify, at some point in history, and I looked for articles on this to try to find something, but I couldn't. So maybe if somebody knows, they can link something down in the description or comment on this. There was a point in time when Spotify was new. And again, I'm using Spotify for all the streaming services here, to sort of represent all of them. It's a point in time when Spotify was new, and they went to the record labels and had to get the rights to stream their music. Spotify does not steal the music. I see people say this all the time. They're stealing from the artists. Well, you may think that in regards to the amount that they pay out per stream, but they are not stealing the music in the way that Napster did in the in the 90s when Napster first came out. Napster was a peer-to-peer thing. They did not get the rights to take that music. Spotify gets the rights to the music. So at some point in time in history, Spotify went to these labels and the labels agreed on this amount that Spotify was going to be paying them. Okay? The labels agreed to this amount. Spotify did not steal the music. They didn't break in the middle of the night and take it. At that time, Spotify was a new entity, so they had no leverage. They came to them, they agreed on this amount. And Spotify is a business. This is just like if your local music store has a 75% off sale on vinyl and CDs. Is it your fault that you went in there and bought a record for 75% off? Is that your fault? No, it's the music store's fault. Is it your fault that if the music store is selling a record for $20, or an individual, if I'm selling a record for $20, if I send this here, I want to sell this record for $20, and somebody sends me a message that says, hey, I'll give you $5 for it, and I say, okay, here, whose fault is that? It's not the person who's buying it, it's the record store. And in this case, it's the record industry. The record industry agreed to this low payout rate. And again, it's way too low. The artist should be getting paid more, but it's not Spotify's fault. They came, the industry gave them this figure, agreed to it, or maybe Spotify came and said, hey, this is what we'll pay you, and the industry said, okay, here you go. Now, you could make the argument that now that Spotify is so large that the recording industry can't survive without it, so now they're stuck, but whose fault is that? That's the recording industry's fault. They shouldn't have agreed on this. And at any point in time, any artist, any record label could sit up and say, you know what, we're not putting our stuff on streaming. And some bands did that for a really long time. Tool, Neil Young. Yeah, there were artists that didn't have their music on streaming. They controlled the rights to their music. They said, no, we're not going to put it on the streaming services, and they have the right to do that. They do not have to agree to the price payout that Spotify is doing. And contrary again to Spotify is stealing music or they're not paying the artist anything, that's not true. In 2021, I'm going to give you some data here. And I'm going to link these articles that I got this from in the description because there's all other kinds of things that you can look at. But this is just some things that I thought were relevant to what we're talking about now. In 2021, Spotify had 33% of all the streaming users. See if you can guess how much Spotify paid out to rights holders. That means anybody who owns the rights to the music, the songwriters, the labels, whoever owns the rights to the music. How much do you think Spotify paid out in 2021? $7 billion. They paid out $7 billion to the rights holders. All the music streaming apps, if you combine all the streaming services, they paid out a combined total of $25 billion to the recording industry in 2021, to the rights holders, I should say, in 2021. That's an increase of 32% from the year before. How much do you think streaming makes up the percentage of revenue for the music industry? It makes up 83% of the industry's revenue. Physical media makes up 11% of that. So that's a huge chunk of the revenue that the music industry receives. And so here's where the problem is, okay? The industry is to blame at the beginning of this for agreeing to these payout rates. But you can sort of understand where when Napster hit, physical sales just absolutely cratered. If you look at a diagram of it, it's just an absolute straight line down. And there were a few years where you couldn't legally download something if you wanted to after Napster came out. It was a few years before iTunes really got up and rolling. And by the way, the music industry also agreed to a terrible deal with iTunes. The music industry is to blame for a lot of terrible, terrible decisions. First of all, Napster came to them early on. They didn't work with Napster to try to make a legal way to do this with streaming. When iTunes came out, they gave away way too much of the money to iTunes. iTunes' interest was in selling iPods, not in selling music. The iPod cost you $300, $400, and then you went and bought the music. Their interest was in the iPods. But the industry gave a lot away to that. On another side note, the industry made a horrible decision when MTV came out. MTV came out and said, you know what, record industry, you make the music videos and give them to us for free, and we'll make money off of advertisers and we'll make all the revenue. And the industry foolishly agreed to that. So now when it comes to streaming, they come in and they foolishly agree to this payout rate. Then, on top of that, the labels have unfair advantages over the artists. They are taking way too much of the streaming money. Again, there was $25 billion went into the industry in 2021 to streaming. But the record labels have terrible contracts with the artists. Some of that is maybe the artist's fault, I don't know. But the industry takes way too much of the streaming money, the labels. And really, there's three labels that eat up the majority of the revenue from the music industry. Universal Music, Sony, and Warner Brothers make up 68% of the music, take 68% of the music industry's revenue. 68% of it. Over 2/3 of the music industry's revenue go to three companies. It's not Spotify's fault. It's the industry's fault. If those three labels said, no, we're taking all of our music off. Well, first of all, they'd lose out on their cut of the $25 billion that came from the streaming services, which is why they don't yank it out, because they're making money off of this. And when we're talking about rock music only accounts for 25% of all streaming. When we're saying rock, we're talking about the Beatles, Rolling Stones, heavy metal, all that sort of rock-related genres in there only make up 20% of the streaming. And streaming, I also made a video, I didn't mention this earlier, I made a video on physical format versus streaming. I'll link that in the description below, and I make the argument that it's here to stay, it's not changing. I'm a physical format person, but I also stream. I'm going to talk about that on my Stop Shaming People for Streaming video. But here's another statistic for you here. The number of Americans with paid streaming subscriptions has increased from 7.9 million in 2014 to 82.1 million in 2021. That's just in America. That's not the world. It has exploded around the world. Okay, so once again, the artists do not get paid enough. Stop blaming Spotify, though. It's not Spotify's fault. Direct your rage at the record labels. Stop getting angry at Spotify. It's the record label's fault. They agreed to this ridiculously low payout rate. And stop saying that the streaming services aren't giving money back. Yes, they are. They gave $25 billion, 83% of what the recording industry made. I forgot to write this down, but the industry has made, I saw this in a stat somewhere, that the height before this of their sales was like 1989, 99 or something, right before Napster. They're making more revenue now than they did at their height in the and then it dropped down and it started coming up again. So the industry is making money. It's just that the record labels are idiots for agreeing to this low payout rate, and they're greedy that they're taking the biggest chunk of the share from it. Okay, there you go. I know this is a hot button topic. Let me know what you guys think. I just needed to get this off my chest because, again, I keep seeing this all over social media. Let me know down below if you guys have any insights on this. If you can link to any articles, check out the articles that I took some of these stats from. If you have stuff, too, that you can, back this up with. Somebody came at me once in a topic I was in, and the guy got pretty angry at me and said that the streaming services did some sort of like what do you call it, lobbying thing, or like something. They strong-armed the recording industry to lower the prices of the streaming, and I researched it. I couldn't find it. I asked the guy, give me a link to what you're talking about, and he never did. And so I don't know what he's talking about. So if you have something that goes against what I'm saying, or a point that you want to make, try to link it to something so that we can understand the context of it and everything, okay? Let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, and make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.